Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Many of you know that this past week, from last Thursday to this past Tuesday, our United Church of Christ gathered for our 29th General Synod. Synod is a church word that just means meeting. We get together for this great meeting every 2 years. This year it was in Long Beach, California. It's part business meeting, part family reunion, especially for the clergy who get together and let their hair down without, well, you guys there. And it is part legislative session. But it's also this. It's more importantly this. A great rehearsal for heaven. Some 3,000 delegates and visitors gathered this year. Each conference of the U.C.C. sends its own delegates, and I want you to know this. If you stand up in front of that body and you look out, it will not look like our pews do. You see, in the United Church of Christ, we're mostly white, mostly middle-aged or older, but we're working on it. You see, we're quite sure heaven won't be mostly white, and we think that neither should the church be either. We're quite sure that heaven won't be mostly middle-aged, and so we think the church shouldn't be either. We think the church should look the way the world looks. And so in the United Church of Christ, in the delegates that the conferences send, as well as in the leadership of the denomination itself, African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, Latinos, and others are all overrepresented if you compare them to our pews. They are underrepresented if you compare them to heaven. We try to make the national church look the way we hope it will look, not the way our churches actually look. We try to catch a vision for what God sees when God looks out over the hosts of heaven, and we try to make it look like that, and we're not there yet, but we're on our way. By the bylaws of the denomination, 20% of each delegation must be made up of youth and young adults. And so when you look out over the General Synod, you see this sea of faces of every hue, and every different kind of hair, and every different shape of eyes, and every age, from tiny babies right up to people who had to be wheeled in because they can't walk anymore, and it is beautiful. This year, I and the feminist theologian Rita Nakashima-Brock went as theological reflectors. It was our job to try to keep the business sessions from being too businessy and not gaudy enough. At the end of each plenary session, we stood up and invited the Synod to reflect on what had just happened over the previous 2 or 2.5 hours in the session, which means this: though I have been to Synod many times as a delegate and in other ways, I paid closer attention this time than I ever have before. The theme of this synod was God's vision. It comes from this reading from the book of Habakkuk. We decided that when we gathered as this national body, it was our job to look for God's vision for the world. Not just for our church, but for the world as well, and to try to live into it. And we did about as well as we ever do. Sometimes we got close. Sometimes we were a little far away. But I want you to know this, Plymouth. Your church is remarkable. Your denomination is remarkable. Here's some of what I saw there. First, something I did not see: the inside of the Hyatt. It's attached to the convention center, a great, big, elegant hotel, and it's so close you wouldn't even have to walk out of the air conditioning to get from this hotel into the convention center. Some of the hotels we stayed in, the hotel I stayed in, were 7, 8, 9 blocks away, and the Hyatt was right there. But for years now, there's been a labor dispute going on between the Hyatt and Unite here. which is the largest labor organization for hotel workers. Unite Here and other labor organizations have called Hyatt the worst hotel employer in America. And so, as a body, we 3,000 United Church of Christ members for whom it would have been so easy to just stay there, as a body, we declined to make our reservations at the Hyatt. And not just that, we send youth, some as delegates to General Synod, but there are a lot of youth there who are not delegates, and so there's programming all week long to keep them busy and engaged and formed in the love of God. All Thursday morning, all of the Synodate youth, hundreds of them, were marching up and down in front of the Hyatt, protesting the labor conditions at that hotel. And I want you to know, I don't want to make any claims I can't substantiate, but I want you to know that several days after our youth protested that Hyatt, the Hyatt Corporation settled a years-long labor dispute, including retroactive wage increases for their employees, guarantees of current health care and pension benefits through 2018, and more. Here's another thing. I told you about all that representation, all that diversity that's out there in the rows and rows and rows of delegates at every General Synod. You know who else was represented? You may not believe it, but it's true. Conservatives, evangelicals, traditionalists. People in our United Church of Christ who think that we're on a slippery slope and about to go right over the edge. And there they sat with the same vote and the same voice as everyone else. They're there because we need them there. They're there because, well, they belong to God, as we do, and we can't do it without them. So you look around Plymouth and you may not see a conservative anywhere in sight, or if there is one, she's probably underground. But you go to Synod and they are there and they are loud and proud and sometimes annoying, but speaking God's truth as they see it. And I, for one, am grateful for the help in not going off the deep end. And these conservatives, these traditionalists, these evangelicals, they, along with everyone else at the Synod, were wearing the rainbow scarves that you knitted. Not just you, that our other churches all across the nation knitted. If you signed a pledge to end LGBT bullying, you got one of these rainbow scarves. I want you to know there were 3,000 of us there and 11,000 scarves. Do that math. Some of them were so beautiful, and some of them were so not. But an army of gentle knitters had put them together, had sent them off, and so we picked them up and brought them home as a sign of our commitment to end violence and bullying wherever we find it. And we didn't just end on that bullying topic with wearing scarves. Following on this, there was a resolution against bullying in all its forms. Resolutions is one of the big ways that the U.C.C. does its business. The local congregations and the local associations and the local conferences write these resolutions, and if they get enough support, they're sent to the Synod. So these are the ones we voted on over those days. There's one calling for the United Church of Christ to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which authorized the genocide of Indian people and the theft of Indian lands. One on making the U.C.C. church buildings more carbon neutral. One against bullying and discrimination. One against mountaintop removal, coal mining in Appalachia. One calling for an all-church offering to support the educational expenses of members in discernment preparing for authorized ministry in the U.C.C. One urging divestment from fossil fuel companies. One in support of outdoor ministries. One advocating for tax reform as Christian stewardship and public duty. The United Samoan Ministries of the United Church of Christ requesting to be recognized as a historically underrepresented group and member of the Council for Racial and Ethnic Ministries. Recognizing the need for compassionate care and healing to our veterans, resisting actions seeking to undermine the status of women in society, advocating for funding to construct quality affordable housing, responding to drug-related gang violence in Honduras, supporting compassionate, comprehensive immigration reform and the protection of the human rights of immigrants, and most excitingly of all, a resolution on the ecumenical relationship between the United Church of Christ and the United Church of Canada. You know this. You know that the United Church of Christ is a church of many firsts. First, to ordain an African American, the first published African American woman, the first mass act of civil disobedience, the first woman ordained in the modern era, the first to ordain an openly gay or lesbian person. And we achieved another first by the grace of God at General Synod 29 this week. Faced with a warming climate, more worst storms, more wettest wets and highest highs, more lowest lows, more most expensive storm ever, we became the first national communion to vote to divest from all fossil fuel and fossil fuel related companies. And this was not without controversy. I want you to know our pension boards, who manage the money that you give to the denomination, who are holding my money and some of your money in trust for when I one day retire, the pension boards whose job it is to figure out how to make the money we have make more money, they fought this hard at first, and then they changed their minds. They said it's going to cost us so much money to do this. If we pull out of all fossil fuel companies, we're going to lose so much money. And they fought for years until they realized that money was nothing compared to the cost of losing the planet. And so at the last minute, they signed on, and we voted. And now, within the next 2 years, not a cent of the money that you send to the United Church of Christ will be invested in that way. Almost as soon as we took the vote, we received a text message from Desmond Tutu, someone who knows something about the power of divestment, thanking us for what we had done. Many of you know, perhaps most of you know, that right before the Synod started, the Defense of Marriage Act went down, and Proposition 8 in California went down. At first, we thought it would be a while before same-sex marriages could happen in California. But then we found out while we were at the Synod that California was going to start issuing marriage licenses immediately. And so one of our local California pastors, a guy named Dave Sigmund and his partner Jay Greaves, they went out and they got their marriage license and they brought it back to Synod. And there, outside the plenary hall, in this great long gallery, 3 stories high, 3,000 people gathered while they were married. And when they were pronounced husband and husband, all 3,000 voices were raised in praise to God. Friends, I want you to know that I have a colleague here in Syracuse who has a church that has 2 gay men in it who want to get married, and he can't do it because of his denomination's policies. He is right now planning a wedding on the steps of his church for these 2 men because they can't do it inside. And he's called me to help him to pull this off. And he's sitting over his desk right now doing the calculus over his book of worship about how much of that wedding ceremony he can say himself without being defrocked, and how much he has to give to me. And your United Church of Christ celebrated one of these marriages in the middle of our General Synod, and you can go watch it on the website if you want. This list goes on and on. Your church is remarkable, Plymouth. Your denomination is remarkable, Plymouth. God's vision is what we were seeking at General Synod 29. Here's what we think God's vision is. A church that loves the place where it is planted. A church that loves the world where it was planted and loves the nation where it was planted. Local churches that love the communities where they are planted. Loves them, but has lovers' quarrels with them sometimes. Churches that can sing America, America, as we will later in this service, and then in the next breath pray, God mend thine every flaw. Here's what we think God's vision is. A world where there is enough for everyone. A world where each person sees every other person and indeed every living thing the way God sees it, which is beloved and beautiful and precious and honored. That's the vision the United Church of Christ, and I think we here at Plymouth are chasing after, and we don't believe that it's just up to God to do it. We believe that it's up to us to do it. Which is why we gather every 2 years, which is why you send me and other delegates off every 2 years to this great, expensive meeting somewhere sunny and beautiful to vote and vote and vote and pray and pray and pray and sing and sing and sing to try to bring this vision to reality. Plymouth, your church is remarkable. Your God is remarkable. Will you pray with me? Come, God, come. We have seen your glory coming. We've seen you trampling out the grapes of wrath. We've seen you calling us forward into a new future. We've seen you calling us to build the future you set before us. Come, God, come. Give us the strength to build your vision. Amen.